I want to welcome back to the show Professor Marianne Franks, Professor of Technology and Civil Rights Law at the George Washington University Law School and author of Fearless Speech, Breaking Free from the First Amendment. Also with us is a great friend of our show, Dahlia Lithwick, MSNBC contributor and senior editor at Slate and host of the Amicus podcast. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being with us. You both had a great conversation on the podcast the other day, which caused me to want to have you on the show to talk about this. Professor Franks, let me start with you. Back in 2004, some will remember, Jon Stewart went on CNN's Crossfire and famously told the hosts that they were hurting America by turning politics into a shouting match. It was a moment that ended up leading to the show's cancellation at the time. Here's a clip of what he said.
I'm here to confront you because we need help from the media, and they're hurting us. To do a debate would be great, but that's like saying pro wrestling is a show about athletic competition.
Sorry. I think you're a good comedian. I think your lectures are boring. Let me ask you a question on the news.
Now, this is theater. I mean, it's obvious. How old are you?
35.
And you wear a bow tie.
Yeah, I do. I do.
So this is...
No, I know.
So
you're right. No, let me just go. No, come on.
And listen, I'm not suggesting that you're not a smart guy, because those are not easy to tie. But the thing is that you're doing theater when you should be doing debate, which would be great.
No, it's
not honest. What you do is not honest. What you do is partisan hackery. And I'll tell you why I know it.
You have John Kerry on your show, and you sniff his throne, and you're accusing us of partisan hackery?
Absolutely.
You've got to be kidding, man.
You're on CNN. The show that leads into me is puppets making crank phone calls. What is wrong with you? You have a responsibility to the public discourse, and you fail miserably.
All right, fast forward 20 years, and that seems weirdly relevant all of a sudden today, Professor Franks.
It does, and I think you sort of miss, right, that we had that kind of incisive critique, and I think some comedians are still trying to do this, and some influential leaders are trying to make this point, but probably didn't make it quite as well. But pointing out the insincerity of this entire debate, if we want to call it that, right? That we're trying, or there is a certain concerted number of people who are trying to blur the lines between debate and theater, who are trying to blur the lines between government control and cultural critique. And because we've had so many people buy into this idea that those lines don't matter, right? It's sort of priming us and has primed us for this moment where now Republicans are saying, well, we have been saying that we care about free speech this whole time, and we've been moving the terms around and redefining things. So even though what looks like absolute government censorship right now might trouble you, but no, trust us, we are the ones in charge of the terms of the debate. And actually, all of the censorship is in fact free speech.
Right, and this is the problem. The trust us is actually the problem, Dahlia. The courts are central to how speech disputes get resolved. It always has been, right? The First Amendment was never abundantly clear. It's always been interpreted. Talk to me about that, because we're seeing the government impose restrictions on speech, which is really what the First Amendment's supposed to protect us from. We're not 100% sure the courts are going to do the right thing on most of these things.
I mean, I think that it's really important to remember that First Amendment doctrine was silent for a really long time. It's relatively recent, historically speaking, and it's also in a lot of ways, and Dr. Franks always speaks to this more eloquently than I do, it's really outdated, right? So you're looking at cases from before the internet, from before television. In many instances, we have really archaic tests for, there's a class of speech that is not protected under the First Amendment, incitement and fighting words and a whole bunch of things. The doctrine is really old. And I would add, the Supreme Court hasn't done a really great job in a lot of areas of updating the doctrine, of thinking about how the internet inflects on that, how, the old-fashioned requirement that you have to have face-to-face encounters in order to violate, the First Amendment, or not violate the First Amendment. Some of that is just old. And so if the criticism is that the doctrine doesn't meet the moment, I think that's a very fair critique. At the same time, the kinds of things that Pam Bondi is calling for when she says we should go after hate speech, there are a lot of countries that criminalize hate speech. We can have a conversation about that. The United States is not one of them. And on this, like, I have to stand with my former debate opponent, Ted Cruz. He's absolutely right. There's no category of hate speech that we go after. And Charlie Kirk said the same thing. So I think we have to be sort of aware of the fact that there's both too much law and not enough law, and an immense amount of abuse of the space between the two.
Yeah, it's a little less binary than some of us were brought up to think. Professor Franks, let's talk about what reinterpreting or reimagining this looks like. You argue that the First Amendment shouldn't be simply a passive shield against censorship, but an affirmative right. Tell me what that means.
And the first thing I really want to emphasize is, as Dahlia was saying, there is no First Amendment that kind of stands outside of history and time and just means something. It's always been a question of how we're going to interpret it, right? If we were trying to take just the text itself and just apply it, the first word of it would already throw us off because it says Congress shall make no law. And of course, we don't just mean Congress now, we mean all government action. And also, we only mean government action. We don't mean private entities, no matter how powerful. The really core principle that has always been true and important about the First Amendment is really that we have the right for the government not to censor us on the basis of our viewpoint, and also has no right to compel us to take a specific viewpoint. So no censorship, no compulsion by the government about our opinions is really that kind of core principle that we really should be maintaining. But what we've gotten instead is a lot of other kinds of, let's say, work around the margins, right, to talk about, well, whether or not we think sometimes social media companies have a lot of power or whether universities have too much power. And we're really moving farther and farther away from the truly defensible core of the First Amendment, which is it always matters whether it's the government or someone else, or if it's the government pushing someone else. We may have a conversation, as Dahlia says, about whether we want communities, universities, social media platforms that have different norms, different values that really either mimic the First Amendment or completely reimagine it. But the thing we really need to be focused on is the danger of government censorship or compulsion when it comes to our opinions. That should have always been our focus. And there's been such an effort to try to take our eyes off that ball and say, no, worry about the students, worry about professors, worry about comedians, as opposed to worry about the government and what it's trying to do to you and your freedom of speech.
So, Dahlia, when the framers had these conversations, they took it seriously. There was real dissent, there was real disagreement, there was real debate. Debate also doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. The reason to run that Jon Stewart clip is to understand his point that some of it's performative. Some of it is not. This is not the Lincoln Douglas debates that we're having today, and I'm not sure people would sit through hours-long policy-oriented debates. But we can't just give in to the fact that things don't get discussed and that dissent is wrong.
Marianne said something on my show last week that I've been sitting with all week. You quoted part of it, which is this government, this administration is in fact a tech company. And we have to think about the fact that it has not just skin in the game. It has, kind of an entire shakedown racket, right? Where everybody who has skin in the game has to answer to Brendan Carr and the FCC if they want their merger approved, right? So I think that's half of the answer to your question. The other half of the answer to the question really is, it seems to me, and Marianne also said this on my show, the marketplace of ideas, itself is a suspect notion, because the end in itself in a marketplace is not, if the marketplace is acting aggressively in the interest of its shareholders, not to protect the free exchange of ideas, particularly unpopular ideas or ideas expressed by unpopular people. And so in some sense, the framers got us off on the wrong foot from the jump Because the idea that this marketplace would surface good ideas rather than surface what it is surfacing now in an attention economy, which is hits and clicks and endorsements, is the place that we need to think about market correction and whether that's the metaphor we really want to live or die
This is a
on.
really important point. I'm glad you brought that up because, Marianne, you know, I'm an economics guy, and you've guided me many times on everything's not economics. Don't think of everything the same way. The market doesn't solve all problems. Give me a little more on this. Why is the marketplace of ideas perhaps the wrong framing for free speech?
I think it's the wrong framing, partly because it actually does reveal more than I think it's intended to reveal, which is we speak of the marketplace of ideas with these kinds of glowing positive terms as if marketplaces were good things by default, right? Which isn't to say that we can have, there are better and worse marketplaces, but as Dahlia was saying, a marketplace in the abstract is not designed to get us truth or democracy or autonomy or any of the things that we think the First Amendment is supposed to get us. It is, if it is unregulated, and if you have disparate amounts of power already in a society, which we always do, it mostly just consolidates power. It just gives more power, more voice to the people who already have it. So the idea that we want to praise that and say, well, we want a marketplace, which usually translates into don't regulate anything. It's not just that that's wrong in the sense that no regulation will get us to truth. It's also that it's not true that there's any such thing as no regulation. The way that we set up a marketplace is regulation. The people that you allow to play in that marketplace is regulation. The barriers to entry is regulation. The question is, what's good regulation versus bad regulation? And the only way to figure that out is to figure out what kind of outcomes we are actually trying to get towards, which is it democracy or is it authoritarianism, right? And depending on which one we're committed to will determine what kind of marketplace we should really have, if that's the metaphor we want to use.
What a meaningful discussion. Thanks to both of you. I encourage people to listen to the podcast episode with the two of you last week. Marianne Franks is a professor of technology and civil rights law at George Washington Law School. Dahlia Lithwick is a senior editor at Slate and an MSNBC contributor and the host of the podcast Amicus with Dahlia Lithwick.